Welcome to Change Starts Here, a Franklin Covey education podcast for K-12 leaders driving meaningful change through bold thinking, real stories, and proven strategies for lasting impact. Now here are your hosts, Kim Yaris and Eve Miller.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to Change Starts Here, Research Conversations. Today's topic is high expectations, which in our conversations together feels like a pervasive topic in education. It's something that most leaders that I, for one, know really care about because it connects to something deeply practical. Who grows? Who gets stuck? And what school communities come to believe is possible, right? And so here's the tension. Leaders try to raise expectations and still see the same patterns. The same students doing most of the thinking, the same staff carrying most of the load, the same people getting the most support, and others getting the safe version of school. So, in this episode, we're drawing on decades of research to shift how we think about expectation. And it comes down to two simple realities. Expectations are visible, and expectations change outcomes because they change behavior. All right. And before we get too far into this, quick note, there are two resources in the show notes, a short research handout and a staff booster that you can use with your team if you want something ready to bring into a meeting. All right, let's get into it. Before we get into the research, let's first get warmed up with a little thought exercise. Are you ready? Bring to mind someone you genuinely believe in. Might be a student, a teacher, a colleague, someone where if they were struggling or are struggling, you don't write the story as they can't. You think they're not there yet, and you stay with them. Now, hold that person in your mind for a second. Next, notice what happens in you when you believe in someone like that. You don't just feel warm, you behave differently. You give those people more time to think. You likely imagine yourself asking a follow-up question instead of moving on. You give feedback that actually helps. You hand them something meaningful to do. You keep the standard clear, and you build a path to get there. All right. Now, still keeping that person in mind, think about the opposite experience. Now, we're not bringing to mind a villain, just a situation where you've quietly lost confidence in someone's growth. So, what changes? Usually, it's very subtle. You expect a little less. You rescue a little sooner. You give them a quote unquote safe task. You stop offering the stretch role. You might monitor more. You might correct more and coach less. So, what this is getting at is why high expectations get misunderstood. So, people assume that it's a mindset, but really, it's a pattern. It's how leaders allocate challenge, time, feedback, and opportunity. So, Eve, I want to turn it over to you now. Why do these patterns have so much power over time?
Wow, yeah. No, Kim, I love the way that you set that up and that reflection. I'm sitting here thinking about it and I have a prepared way of answering this, but what's really coming to mind for me is these patterns stay patterns because we don't examine them. We're not aware of them, right? So, um, and I'll also say though that the patterns have so much power over time because the pattern becomes the environment. So this
Mm.
unexamined expectation that we have about a person, whether good or bad, somewhere in the middle, right?
Mhm.
It becomes the environment that you live in and that person lives in when they're around you. And that has a real energy. You know the feeling.
Mhm.
You know the feeling. Everyone listening knows the feeling of
Yes.
being at a party, walking into a room, and you feel an energy.
You do.
This isn't scientific, right? But like there's an energy about it, and there's for good, right? Like you see someone you really like, or what you spoke about, the people you really believe in, and that it has a real power. And over time, you learn to associate being in that environment with that person with the behaviors, the interactions that you have. So, put a different way, so bring this all back. High expectations, they're not just a belief you hold in your head, right?
Okay.
High expectations are a belief plus the environment that the belief produces.
Ooh.
And yeah, well, hang on. Because as I was thinking about this and preparing, I was thinking, what is it about this research that has really stuck with me? Because this is powerful research we really stay on top of and like to understand with our focus on paradigms within the leader and me process. And here's what sticks with me: the expectations that you or I that we hold about ourselves and about others, it's it can feel like this thing that's within us, right?
Mm.
But it's far more visible than we realize. And when we realize that the expectations we have show up, in 1,000 decisions we make that we primarily don't even realize that we're making, and that show up in all the interactions we have with other people. That person that you hold so high in your mind, and then that non-villain villain person that you brought to mind, right? You interact with them differently as much as you might try to hide it because maybe one of them is in a position of power or something like that.
Mhm.
That leaks out. There it is visible, our expectations. And bringing this to the classroom, those expectations that we hold about students, right? About parents of the students, the families of the students, the caregivers, they are leaking out of us. And so being
Mm.
aware of them so that we can do something about it. Like it's very natural in so many ways, right? But to do something about it is really important. And they matter, and why it matters that we focus on them is because it will change our behavior like I was speaking about. And this is the central finding across decades of research. We interact differently based on what we expect,
Mhm.
often without realizing it, and people adapt to that treatment. And over time, performance starts to match the pattern. So return to the pattern. And in fact, um, Dr. Christy Ruby Davies, she's one of my favorite researchers in this area, a lovely New Zealand lady that you can see on YouTube if you'd like. We'll link her in the show notes. But she talks about within the school setting these cycles of expectations, right? So you have an expectation that leads you to behave towards a student in a certain way that opens up opportunities or removes some opportunities, even small ones across time. That then gives, like, let's go with the high expectations for a student, that gives them more opportunities for learning. Um,
Mhm.
we're not talking these big things because we know like teachers are in this, administrators are in this for the right reasons, to be so clear. But over time, these feelings of, "Oh, I can't trust that student to do this," or that student's just going to do this if I do that. Like it's these things that feel like it's a the right way of thinking about the student, but they add up to opportunities. They
Mhm.
add up to mislearning. They add up to these chances that are denied to some students and given to others. And so it's not to say that we're bad for doing this, it's to make us aware so that we can make different choices. We can also apply this to administrators listening, right? So we think about the members of our teams, like, or other, because we have other leaders who listen, thinking about people on your team that you're more likely to reach out to at certain points. You're more likely to ask to take on the new project, to take on more responsibility. Often it's because you can count on the person, and it's just being aware that maybe there's a place to build relationships that can really help to elevate the work of others. And so it's not about the dramatic, it's about the day to day. Does this bring anything to mind for you, Kim? Like, do you think of, like, in your teaching experiences, or, in your leadership positions?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm hearing you correctly, um, it always stirs up some emotions for past students because I'm like, I know that there were some times when I, as a classroom teacher, might be running low on patience because they might be active. And I know that they need a little bit more reminders to be focused during a lesson. And I hesitate to say, but will admit that I think that I might have had lower expectations. Those might have been the students that I might have paused before I said, "Hey, why don't you lead your group in X, Y, or Z activity?" Because, my expectation was a little bit lower. So my belief was definitely impacting the behaviors that followed. So I had kind of like one set of pattern for um, some students and maybe a different pattern for another,
Yeah.
less so. And, so in my defense, and in probably, anybody who can, see themselves in what I'm talking about, I think, what was at the root of it, I'd like to believe it wasn't because my expectation was low. It's just that there was this conflicting tension in the classroom between expectation and efficiency, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how do I get to the next lesson
Yeah.
and, keep it as a well, and a third tension would be effectiveness too, right? So it's expectation, efficiency, and effectiveness. All of these three
Right.
things competing with one another and making decisions. Sometimes it's in response to expectation, sometimes it's in response to efficiency, and sometimes in response to effectiveness.
I think that's so powerful. It reminds me of this thing that I read, and I cannot, for years I've been looking for it, but it stayed with me because I think it's another, like, factor to loop in here, and that is this idea that the research they had looked at, one of their takeaways was, looking at this longitudinal, so over many, many years for a student, the data on these students, and saying, there's this trajectory that perhaps is a bit extreme, but by the 8th day of kindergarten, is set for them through high school graduation, right? Like,
Mm,
so this cycle of expectations. So
mm,
I think that also brings in a student, as we said, like, you also respond to the person who has low expectations of you. You feel that energy from they behave
yeah,
towards you. You're like, why don't they like me? Right. Or
yeah,
or, the person who just loves you unconditionally,
yeah,
and the way that you respond differently to them
yeah,
in a similar way and in a more subtle way. I do think students also get in their heads, like, this is the label I'm gonna put on as who I am. I'm, to use the 80s terms that I know, the class clown, right? Like, I am the bad student. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at, and, like, teachers don't like me. I don't like school. Whatever those labels are that can come off as disengagement, they are also labels that have been put on over time, that they've put on themselves through interactions or the way that they've interpreted the environment. So I think one of the reasons why Kim and I are bringing this research forward is to say, we can help students, and we can help members of our team remove the labels that hold back their potential. Like we have the ability to bust through these, like especially for those lower expectation students, right? The students on those high expectation, that's great. Let's keep them there, right? But it's those that just are not seen for the leaders that they are. The staff members who just, you know, they don't think that anyone wants their voice in the room when they might bring all these gifts and talents, but they've never been invited to, and maybe they need a little more encouragement. So, these are the things that we want to bring into it, and that the research says if we can look at and have ways, practices that Kim's going to get into here in just a moment, practices that allow us to pull back from all those decisions that are efficient, that are helping us to make it through the day, because there is so much on educator and administrators' plates. We know that, but little practices that we can build into what we're already doing that allow us to have a fresh lens that could change a life. I know every single person listening wants that, wants to do good with the leadership opportunity, the leadership positions that you already have. So Kim, what are some ideas? What are some practices that we can help put on a new lens, or maybe clean up the one we have just a little?
Well, good news is that the research points to several practices that matter.
Mm,
In the interest of time, we're going to give you what we feel are like the top four. So, the first is you can do what we're calling an opportunity audit. So, what is this? It's a short, practical check on your default settings. So, what you do is you take a week or two and you track who you give stretch assignments to. Who do you coach through a struggle? Who are you giving extra time to revise? And who are you assigning routine assignments to or work to? And the idea is that when you step back and take a look at it, what shows up on paper is often very different from what we intend, because expectations live in access, right? An opportunity audit makes those patterns visible so that as leaders, we can interrupt them intentionally instead of reinforcing them by default.
May I just say that makes me think about, and there's different versions of this out there, right? Like printing off a roll, and every time you interact with a student, you kind of check it off throughout a week, and then you check back in and you like add like the level and different things like that. But what you just said there that connects back to something I was saying earlier is, it expectations are visible, but perhaps the person that they're invisible to, the one person that they're invisible to is ourselves. So what you're speaking to in that practice is making them more visible because they are
Mhm.
felt and seen by others. But this allows us to see what, with routines and just, the kind of unconscious mind in some ways, right? They become less visible to us. So I think that's great. So,
All right.
please.
Second thing that you could do is you can separate the snapshot from the pathway. Okay, fancy words. What the heck does that mean? So think of a snapshot is where someone is today, and the pathway is what you intentionally design next. So leaders sometimes find themselves in a place they don't want to be when they confuse the two, when the snapshot becomes like a ceiling instead of a starting point. So a better question to ask might be, what's the next stretch that's plausible, and what supports make that growth possible? So, this distinction keeps expectations dynamic, right?
Mm,
Focused on design rather than judgment.
mm. So the snapshot is thinking of people as kind of like this fixed place in time, right? Like that person's not
Yes,
going to change. That person
yes,
is this.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah, I love that. Okay, go on.
All right, all right. Third, use wise feedback. So, this is where
Mm,
high expectations sound different in real conversation. So, wise feedback keeps three things together: the standard, belief in capacity, and the next step. So, for example, a leader offering wise feedback might say, "This isn't at the standard yet. I'm holding you to it because I know that you can get there. So, let's come up with two moves together that can help get you where you need to be." So there's no softening of the bar, but there isn't abandonment of the bar either, right? So when we repeat that kind of feedback often, we help to build trust and persistence rather than fear or compliance.
Love that.
All right. And the fourth and final practice, educators, pair challenge with support. So high expectations don't live in the demand, they live in the pathway. And too often we expect improvement, but we don't design for it. So designing for improvement means planning scaffolds, protecting revision time, normalizing second drafts, whether we're talking about students or adults. Growth accelerates when challenge is matched with structure. And over time, this pattern teaches people that effort is expected, and so too is support. So both components are at work.
May I say, that reminds me, we'll have it in the show notes of Dr. Zaretta Hammond. If this really resonates with you, her idea of the warm demander, she has great practices in her book. So we'll link that in the show notes. But I love that. It's such a powerful practice. And it breaks a misconception about, expectation means having high expectations for all without really like grounding them in what the student or the staff member needs. I love these practices. Clearly I didn't hear them before. So I'm like so excited about them. I love it.
All right. So listeners, our takeaway for you today is that expectations become real as patterns, right? Those patterns shape effort, risk taking, and growth. And over time, the loop either expands people's capacity or it shrinks it. So, once again, we remind you, if you want to bring this to your staff, there's a great staff booster in the show notes. There's also a handout, beautiful, something that, people that you work with can take home and, kind of digest this information a little bit more deeply. And we just want to end by saying, if this is the kind of research translation that you find useful, follow or subscribe so new episodes show up automatically. And we'll keep bringing you practical research grounded moves for leadership. And hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, y'all.
Franklin Covey Education is a trusted partner in developing leaders from the classroom to the boardroom in over 8,000 schools in over 70 countries.